Imagine 5,000 soldiers, fully armed, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile forces on every side, and every single one of them falls asleep. Not in a fortress. Not behind city walls. In the middle of an open field. How? Most armies in the ancient world had a terrifying problem. When the sun went down, they became vulnerable. Fires gave away their position. Exhausted men slept wherever they could, against trees, in ditches, under wagons. No order. No system. One surprise attack in the dark, and an entire campaign could be wiped out in minutes. But the Roman army? They solved this problem so completely, so methodically, that historians still study it 2,000 years later. The Romans didn't just survive the night in enemy territory. They owned it. There was a hidden system, one that turned something as basic and human as sleep into a military weapon. And once you understand how it worked, you'll never look at a campsite the same way again. It begins before the army even stops marching. Every single day, while the main column was still moving, a group of soldiers was already riding ahead. These were called the mensors, the measurers. Their job was to find the next campsite before anyone else arrived. And they weren't just looking for flat ground. They were following a checklist. The site needed to be on elevated terrain if possible, high enough to see approaching threats, but not so exposed that it caught the full force of the wind. It needed access to fresh water, ideally within a quarter mile. It needed to be free of dense vegetation on the perimeter, trees and shrubs could hide enemy scouts. And it needed to be large enough. Large enough for thousands of men, their equipment, their horses, their supply wagons, and the full infrastructure of a moving Roman city, because that's what a Roman marching camp was. A city. Built in a single afternoon, every single day. By the time the legions arrived at the chosen site, the mensors had already marked the ground. Colored flags. Stakes in the earth. Each section of the camp pre-designated before a single tent was pitched. The soldiers didn't wander in and find a spot. They marched to their exact position the moment they arrived. This wasn't coincidence. Every Roman soldier knew the layout of camp the same way you know the layout of your own home. No matter where in the empire they were stationed, Britain, Egypt, Syria, the Rhine, the camp was always identical. The Principia, the commander's headquarters, always in the center. The Via Principalis, the main road, always running east to west. The Praetorium, the general's tent, always facing the main gate. Latrines always downwind and downhill. Same. Every time. When you woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented, half asleep, you always knew exactly where you were and exactly where to go. Now here's where it gets extraordinary. The camp itself was a fortress. Every night, without exception, the Roman army dug one. We're talking about a rectangular perimeter, typically around 2,000 feet long and 1,400 feet wide for a full legion, surrounded by a ditch. The fossa. Dug by the soldiers themselves, using the tools they carried on their backs. A standard marching pack for a Roman legionary weighed somewhere between 60 and 90 pounds. In that pack, weapons, armor, food rations, a hand mill for grinding grain, a cooking pot, personal tools, and a dolabra. A combined pickaxe and hoe. They dug the ditch first. Always. Before the tents went up, before the fires were lit, before anyone ate. 3 feet deep, 3 feet wide at minimum. Sometimes deeper. The dirt from the ditch was piled inward to create a rampart, the agger, topped with a wooden palisade made from the pointed stakes every soldier also carried. The vallus. 2 of them, strapped to the pack. So the Roman army literally carried its own walls on its back. Think about that. Every night, across enemy Gaul, across the deserts of Judea, across the mountains of Dacia, the same ditch, the same rampart, the same palisade. Rising out of empty ground in a matter of hours. Polybius, the Greek historian who observed the Roman army up close, described watching this process and being genuinely astonished. He said the camp appeared as if the Romans had brought a walled city with them on campaign. He wasn't exaggerating. But walls don't protect you if no one is watching them. Here is where the Roman sleep system becomes truly remarkable. Sleep, for a Roman soldier, was not optional and not unstructured. It was managed, rotated, guarded with the same precision as everything else. The night was divided into 4 watches: the Prima Vigilia, Secunda Vigilia, Tertia Vigilia, and Quarta Vigilia. Each watch lasted roughly 3 hours, calibrated to the seasonal length of the night. In summer, the watches were longer. In winter, shorter. But the division was always 4. A unit of soldiers, typically between 10 and 40 men depending on the position, was assigned to each watch. They manned the gates. They walked the ramparts. They monitored the roads leading to camp. They checked the horses. They verified the fires. And then they were relieved. And they slept. This meant that at any given moment during the night, a significant portion of the army was awake, armed, and alert. But it also meant that every soldier was guaranteed rest. You weren't lying awake all night wondering if someone was keeping watch. You knew someone was. You had been that someone earlier. It was a system built on trust, enforced by law. Because here is where the Romans made sleep not just a routine, but a matter of life and death. The watchword. Every night, a wooden tablet was passed from the general's tent down through the chain of command. On that tablet was a single word, the watchword for the night. Every soldier on watch knew it. Every patrol knew it. If you moved through camp after dark and were challenged, you spoke the word. You were passed through. If you couldn't speak the word, you were either an enemy, or you were a Roman soldier who had fallen asleep on duty. And the Romans had a very specific punishment for that. It was called fustuarium. If a soldier was caught sleeping on watch, he was reported to the tribune. The tribune would touch him with a staff, the ceremonial beginning of the punishment. And then every soldier in the legion had the right to beat him. With clubs. With stones. With fists. Most men who underwent fustuarium did not survive it. This wasn't sadism. This was calculation. In enemy territory, one sleeping sentry could mean the death of 5,000 men. The punishment was proportional to the risk. And it worked. Desertion was also considered capital, but falling asleep on watch was treated with equal gravity. The Roman soldier understood this from his first day of training. The watch was not a minor duty. It was the wall between the sleeping army and annihilation. Now let's talk about what it actually felt like. Because this is where we have to stop admiring the system from above and step inside it. You are a legionary. You've been marching since before dawn, roughly 20 miles, in full kit, in whatever weather the gods decided to throw at you. Your feet are blistered. Your shoulders are raw from the straps. When the campsite appears, you don't feel relief. You feel the dull recognition that you still have hours of work ahead. You dig. Everyone digs. The ground might be rocky. It might be waterlogged. It doesn't matter. The ditch gets dug. Then you pitch the tent. 8 men to a tent, a contubernium, sharing roughly 100 square feet of leather between them. The tent smells. It always smells. Wet leather, unwashed bodies, iron, smoke. You've stopped noticing. You eat. If you're lucky, you have hot food. The army tried to ensure this, because a fed soldier is a functional soldier. Grain, usually. Posca, vinegar mixed with water, to drink. Sometimes dried meat, olives, hard cheese. Then you sleep. Or you try to. Because if your watch is the Tertia Vigilia, the third watch, the one that starts around midnight, then you know you'll be woken just as your body reaches its deepest, most desperate rest. The Optio, the unit second in command, will kick your tent. You have minutes to get your armor on, grab your weapon, and relieve the men shivering on the rampart. And those men? They almost run back to the tent. Not just from cold. From the particular terror of standing in the dark outside the walls, listening to the sounds of a foreign landscape, animals you don't recognize, wind through trees you can't name, wondering if the shadow you just saw at the tree line was a deer or a Gallic warrior. This was the nightly reality of the Roman legionary on campaign. Not glorious. Not heroic. Cold, exhausted, mundane, and terrifying in equal measure. What happened when the system broke down? History gives us the answer. In 9 AD, 3 entire Roman legions, somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 men, were destroyed in the Teutoburg forest. The general, Publius Quinctilius Varus, had been marching his army through Germanic territory. Intelligence reports suggested unrest. He should have fortified and waited. He didn't. The legions were caught strung out on a forest road, unable to form proper formation, unable to construct a defensible camp. Arminius and his Germanic coalition attacked over 3 days of ambush. The Romans never had a chance to implement their system. There was no ditch. No rampart. No organized watches. No fallback perimeter. All 3 legions were annihilated. When Augustus Caesar received the news in Rome, he reportedly wandered his palace for days, refusing to cut his hair or beard, striking his head against the wall and crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." The Teutoburg disaster became the case study the Roman military used for generations afterward. It proved something the army already believed: the camp system wasn't optional. It wasn't a preference. It was survival. The moment Roman soldiers stopped being engineers and became just fighters, they died. Now let's compare this to everyone else. Take the Persian army under Xerxes, who invaded Greece in 480 BC, an enormous force, perhaps the largest ever assembled in the ancient world. By most accounts, it was chaos on the march. Supply lines were improvised. Campsites were chosen for convenience, not defense. When the Greeks used night raids and guerrilla tactics, the Persian encampments had no reliable system to respond. Or consider medieval European armies, more than 1,000 years after Rome. Most of them still didn't have a standardized camp structure. Knights camped near their retinues. Infantry slept where they could. Watches were inconsistent, dependent on individual commanders. Surprise attacks at night were a common and effective tactic precisely because medieval armies were so vulnerable after dark. Even the Mongols, perhaps the most tactically brilliant cavalry force in history, relied primarily on speed and mobility rather than fortification. Their genius was in movement. Rome's genius was in stopping. The Roman system was unique because it treated the night as a problem to be engineered, not endured. Most armies survived the night. Rome managed it. So here is your answer. How did Roman soldiers sleep in enemy territory? They didn't just sleep. They built a city first. They measured the ground, dug the ditch, raised the rampart, planted the palisade, established the gates, assigned the watches, passed the watchword, rotated the guards, organized the tents, positioned the horses, and only then, in a secured, structured, identical replica of every camp they had ever built anywhere in the known world, did they close their eyes. And even then, a third of them stayed awake. This was not bravery. It was not luck. It was not instinct. It was a system. Refined over centuries, enforced with lethal discipline, carried in the backs and minds of every man who served under the eagle. The Roman army didn't conquer half the known world because its soldiers were born fighters. They conquered it because they were the only army in history that turned something as vulnerable as sleep into something as formidable as a fortress. Every single night. For 500 years. Here's a question for you. We think of vulnerability as a weakness to hide. The Romans thought of it as a problem to solve. What if the thing that's making you most vulnerable right now isn't a weakness, it's just an engineering problem waiting for a system? Leave your thoughts below. And if this made you wonder how Roman soldiers ate, marched, and endured the brutal physical demands of a campaign that could last years, that story is coming next. And trust me, the food alone will make you grateful to live in the 21st century.